My name is Christopher Duldalau,
And I'm Brian Collins.
and we're Medical Reserve Corps members with Alameda County. Today we'll be talking about Stop the Bleed, a training program that teaches civilians and nursing students about bleeding control principles.
Motivated by the 2012 Sandy Hook shooting and other man-made tragedies, the American College of Surgeons and leaders of the U.S. military convened to create the Hartford Consensus, which created a national protocol to enhance the survivability of an active shooter. Using the algorithm and national program they've created, we will be demonstrating how to recognize serious bleeds and different ways to stop them.
If you ever find yourself in a situation that requires immediate bleeding control, remember safety and your ABCs. First, make sure the scene is safe. Once that is done, protect yourself from blood-borne infection by wearing gloves, if available.
Next, we'll go over the ABCs. A. Alert first responders by calling 911, or better yet, have someone else call 911. Next is B for bleeding. Find the bleeding injury. How do you recognize life-threatening bleeding? Here are some things to look for. Blood that is spurting out of the wound, also known as pulsatile bleeding, blood that is pooling on the ground, or clothing that is soaked with blood. Here are some examples of blood spurting and blood-soaked clothing, both of which signify life-threatening bleeds. Once you've identified the bleeding, you'll want to move to C, compression. Apply pressure to stop the bleeding by covering the wound and applying pressure using a tourniquet, or packing and filling the wound. Depending on where the injury is located, you will be using different techniques to stop the bleed. We will go over this next.
If the wound and uncontrolled bleeding is on a limb, you'll use direct pressure or a tourniquet. Here we'll demonstrate how to properly use a tourniquet.
Okay, so here we have a combat application tourniquet, CAT tourniquet for short. This blue one here is for training purposes only. The ones that you'll use in the field will be black. There are many different types of tourniquets. This just happens to be one of the more common ones. It's very easy to use. This blue one here would not be one you want to use in the field unless it was brand new. So this one's probably been used 25 times and you wouldn't want to use this in the field. So that said, we'll get started. Briefly, I'll show you about the different components here. As you can see, this is Velcro. There's a buckle here that I like to keep looped and ready to go. Some people prefer to have it undone all the way so that they can maybe loop it around the leg or whatever. Personally, I like to have this ready to go through the buckle like that. We also have this here, which is called a windlass, and this will be used to crank down and tighten the tourniquet. And then finally we have another Velcro strap here where you can write the time, and a little like C-clamp here. So we'll go ahead and get started. For this training purpose, we'll go ahead and pretend that Chris has an arterial bleed here. So what we'll do is we'll go above that, of course, and not on the junction. And so the first step is to take this with it through the loop and crank it down as tight as you can. And you want to have all of this within view, so you wouldn't want to set it up like this because then you can't really see what you're doing. So put this where you want it and then really crank this down. I mean, as tight as you can get it. I'm going to avoid trying to hurt Chris because it can be painful, but as tight as you can get it. And then you're going to loop this all the way up until this C-clamp, but not past it, okay? So this is all open like this. And then you take this windlass and you crank it. You warn the patient, this is going to hurt, but it's going to save your life. They might cry out. Doesn't matter, you got to get this as tight as you possibly can, okay? So I'm not going to do that to Chris, but you would go a whole nother rotation, or at least a half. It's typically 1.5 turns of the windlass. So you get that tight, and then you pop it down in there, and it's going to hold, right? So at this point, if I've done it correctly, the bleed right here has stopped gushing, and then I've also obliterated the pulse, and it's really important to check that. Okay, so I've obliterated the pulse. The next step is to take this tail, and this is important. You need to take this tail and go underneath this C-clamp here, or C, whatever you call it. Okay, so underneath it like that, okay? And then you take this piece, and this is Velcro, and you go over the top like that. That way, if this tail's flopping around and it gets snagged, it's not gonna loosen the whole thing, okay? Next thing you do is tuck this in, however, write the time on it, and then double check that the pulse is still obliterated, and then go ahead and with a non-permanent marker, unless you want to, mark them up permanently, just mark a T somehow. That way, if they're covered with a blanket, there's a transition of care, then somebody will know right away without examining the whole patient that there's a tourniquet on this person. If the wound and serious bleeding is in a junctional area, such as neck, shoulder, and groin, you will be using direct pressure and wound packing. Here, we will demonstrate how to properly pack a wound.
So now I'm going to be demonstrating how to pack a wound that's located in a junction area. Junction area can include the armpit, groin, or neck. So let's imagine that this is a wound right here. What you're going to do is you're going to first locate the source of bleeding. You'll have to dig around and clean it out a little bit. You're going to grab your non-conforming stretch gauze, which I have here. You're going to tie a knot at the end of it, and then you're going to be packing it where the blood is flowing. So I see my wound. I've located the source of the bleed. So now I'm going to apply as much pressure as I can. So what I'm going to do is grab my gauze, putting as much pressure as I can with my thumb. I'm going to pack the wound, grab my gauze, pack. Pressure, pack. Pressure, pack, pressure. You're going to do this until the wound is fully packed or until you can get the bleeding to stop. And sometimes that might take 2 of these gauze. Once you have it fully packed, you're going to go ahead and apply direct pressure until first responders arrive. Lastly, if the wound and serious bleeding is in the chest or abdomen, front, back, or side, this bleeding usually cannot be stopped outside the hospital and needs rapid transport to a trauma center. The purpose of this video was to briefly go over the Stop the Bleed training created by the Hartford Consensus and bleedingcontrol.org. Should you ever find yourself in a situation where you're first on scene of a life-threatening bleed, remember safety, the ABCs, and the tourniquet and wound packing skills taught in this video. This will increase the chances of survivability until first responders arrive.